You probably saw on the news today that 2 inmates of Pentonville prison had escaped. And this brought to mind that our mutual friend, Michael Howard, who was then Home Secretary, was asked to go and open a new wing of Pentonville prison. And as he rose to speak to the gathering, much as I'm speaking to you now, the question that was uppermost in Michael's mind was, what is the correct address, the correct greeting for all these people? And his first thought was, distinguished guests. And he thought that wasn't quite right. So then his next thought was, my lords, ladies and gentlemen. He thought that wasn't quite right either. And then he settled on, it gives me great pleasure to see so many of you here today. And it gives me great pleasure to see so many of you. And if I greet you as my friends, that would be wonderful. It's great that you're all here, and it's wonderful to have such a turnout for our distinguished guest. You know that normally at exactly this moment, the host, such as I, says, our distinguished guest requires no introduction. And usually that's because the guest is somebody who's been famous for 15 minutes. Well, so far as Ken Clarke is concerned, he's been famous for certainly my and all our entire political lifetime. And his fame was, of course, originally based on his shoes, and that was long before Theresa May put on her first Jimmy shoes. But it's really been, you're all going to read this marvellous book, which has had fabulous reviews, but you're going to see there that it's true that his fame was really based on the fact, one fact, which is that Ken is regarded as a man of principle. And that is exactly what he is. And he's going to speak to us about his book, and we're going to have the opportunity to ask him questions on all the relevant subjects of his life, including the key question, which emerges from any readership of this book, which is that Ken Clarke was always described as the natural leader of the Conservative Party. Yeah. And for one reason or another, he didn't become the leader of the Conservative Party. And we've got a tremendous opportunity here with him tonight to talk to him about that and get his views on that, on the Conservative Party, and of course on the amazing situation that we now have in relation to the EU and Brexit. So, Ken, would you speak to us, please?
Well, Maurice, thank you very much, and thank you very much all for coming in such numbers which slightly overwhelm the modest premises of the Centre for Policy Studies, but it's good to see you all. And I shall speak very briefly, because Maurice thinks you'll all ask questions, and most of you here have had to hear me speak on a number of occasions, so I'll just briefly touch on the book, but thank Maurice for inviting me. It was entirely his idea. My publishers would be extremely grateful, because I am as they've paid me quite a bit in advance already. I'm doing my least. I'd be churlish not to help them try to sell a few. So I'm going through at this late stage a whole new episode in my life. I tried to live most of my life on the Monty Python principle, and now for something completely different. And producing a book has led me to going in for things like literary festivals, which I had never previously been there. And I have, they're very nice audiences, they're very easy engagements, they do ask questions. It's the ageing middle classes, largely Guardian readers and frightfully civilised, and they all want me to sign the book, the ones of them who bought it, and I'm finding it's quite restful and enjoyable. I drove back from Ilkley this morning, having done it last night. I feel like one of these ageing ham actors now doing provincial gigs around sort of last night Ilkley, you know, I've done Cheltenham, I think before the weekend I do Dulwich, and it keeps me out of mischief and away from the House of Commons, which some of my party colleagues I've no doubt are at the moment extremely grateful. But the book was a new venture. My main connection with Centre for Policy Studies, really, apart from going to meetings over and now and again over the years, is through my old friend Tessa Keswick. She was involved in a lot of this at one point. She was my special advisor, my political aide, so she was in the thick of things for quite a few years with me. And then she took off. And she took off because people were forming the Centre for Policy Studies, and then she wound up as chief executive or whatever it was of it, and was the guiding light in Centre for Policy Studies for some time. as people want to ask questions, and as you don't want just another political speech, I'd only explain that I was bullied by my last special advisor into doing this. I never intended to do an autobiography. Let's face it, it is a rather corny and conventional thing for veteran politicians to do at the end of their career when they can't think there's much else to do now, and so they turn to the autobiography. I certainly wasn't going to write. I can't even read my own longhand writing now. I would say the attempt to write a book has been a disaster. I have no keyboard skills, I'm proud to say. So she got me a very clever dictaphone. One of these things which you plug it in the office when you're back, and in some other office it types it all up, and it all seems to work. And I didn't believe it worked, but it seemed to. And she pointed out that I, wouldn't have any red boxes to do now, because this happened when I was finally retiring from the cabinet, and she was off on maternity leave and all the rest of it, and got time to mess about and bully me into doing all this. So it is true, late at night, it's in the foreword, but it's perfectly true, I always wind up with a brandy and a cigar late at night. It used to be when I did my red boxes. Then it became, every now and again, not every night for heaven's sake, I would settle down and suddenly give this stream of consciousness stuff, and we applied thousands of words, and again, a lot of very bright people then helped me edit it, persuaded me to drop bits or reorder bits of it and put it into a book. And so, some people say they can hear me speaking when they read it. Well, I apologise for that. Particularly as sometimes you'll find some of the views are probably ones that not everybody agrees with, but it just sets up my life, and it's not too revealing. I mean, I'm not over troubled by my privacy, but I don't go into my family and everything else, and the publisher wanted me to put bits in about jazz and cricket and all the rest of it, and I enjoy those. I'm going to spoil it by having to write about them. So there's passing references. The title, for those of you who follow modern jazz at all, has an illusion. It's kind of ambiguously something to do with the Conservative Party, unless you know that it's the title of a Miles Davis album, a very famous one, which is. And unlike most books, when I'm told the big row is usually about the title, people write very long and brilliant tomes and then have a terrific row about what the title could be, and nobody could think of one. I got the title a long time before I got most of the book, but I carried on, and there it is, and I hope you all enjoy it. Almost up to the present day. Theresa May eventually sails in at the end. I didn't want to do the recent stuff. I thought I shall offend quite a few of my friends, slightly, I hope. I'm not too vitriolic about anybody. I never am, I don't think. But I thought, well, it's been unfair of my colleagues still in their careers. Somebody leaves the cabinet and starts writing up the last cabinet. So I thought I pulled my punches and was quite restrained, really, in my little less candour, Cameron years. When they made me do an oral book, and I read it, I'm not quite sure that I pulled my punches quite as much as I intended, but when next I meet David, no doubt he will give me his opinion, and he will take his revenge in his own memoirs next year. But it's essentially a political memoir. That's why I mentioned there's, it's not all about my life and times and, my travels or anything of that kind. It's not researched. I didn't go and get all my papers out of the departments. It hasn't got footnotes. Historians can do all that. A lot of the policy issues I was in are just touched on as a setting because, in fact, some of the things I did, give examples where I used to be a pension specialist, old battles about pensions and social security, old budgets. I mean, the budget's dead as a dodo, except to a specialist, normally 6 months after delivered it. The content, frightfully exciting at the time, fades away. So this is me giving my perspective as a spectator. I just happened to be there. I explained what I was doing, why I was doing it, and particularly with more dramatic events, exactly how the whole thing unfolded from the point of view of one of the participants. And off my head, so they did check the facts as where they could, but they will insist on using Google, but I don't think there are any errors. It's candid and truthful, I think. I did keep notes of the more manic occasions in which I was directly involved. I thought just to amuse myself in my dotage. 2 or 3 days after Black Wednesday and 2 or 3 days after the resignation of Margaret, I actually did sit down and write a narrative of the bizarre events of the previous 2 or 3 days. And so that was helpful, and I came to write that up, and I just turned them into the third party. There's pretty contemporary accounts of them, 1 or 2 other episodes. But otherwise, what was fresh in my mind, I put in. What I've forgotten, I don't think I've forgotten anything because it was too embarrassing. I just, no doubt I've forgotten some things. But I'm glad it's off my plate, and I shall now become the aging actor touring the provinces, doing these gigs at strange literary festivals in a world I've never previously inhabited, and no doubt Macmillan will succeed in selling a few of the books, but I hope if you do buy it, I hope you enjoy it. I have never got an author to sign a book in my life. It's never occurred to me. But at literary festivals, long queues form as soon as you sit down. But I shall happily sign a book to anybody who wishes me to sign a book. But what I really hope is if you do buy it, you feel you get modest value for money and you enjoy some bits of it. And it reminds you of political battles, which some of the people in this room were all involved in. And because it has a political point, I do keep restating my own principles of politics. The reason I really agreed to put it in a book was to carry on propagating my own particular brand of conservatism and point out that it did have a purpose, why I thought we should do what I was engaged in. An approach to politics which I think is not so widespread as it was, but the moment an old man starts saying things aren't what they were, 10, and actually things have never been as they are at the moment. I'm enjoying enormously, apart from the political direction it's going in, the present unbelievable shambles. For my last Parliament, I couldn't have had a more interesting and gripping set of events for political Iraq. Nobody knows what's going to happen between now and Christmas, and I propose to enjoy myself for the rest of the Parliament, having a privileged position of being able to participate and put my oar in when I can, in, of course, as helpful a way as ever. So, Boris, thank you very much for having me.
Ken is happy to take a few questions. If you would, you will help him by saying who you are and if you represent any organisation. And why don't we start over here?
Andy Mayers, speaking in a personal capacity, I saw one of your matinee performances in 1999 on the stage of the IMAX launching the Britain in Europe campaign.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, with Tony and Michael Heseltine and a very reluctant Gordon Brown.
I mean, the campaign was for the euro and didn't succeed. Were there any lessons or seeds in that campaign that were relevant to what then happened this year?
Not really, no. Tony always wanted to get us all campaigning on a European platform. He said he had this in the book. He told me once he had 2 ambitions. One was to get the Labour Party to learn to love Peter Mandelson, and the other was to get Britain to come to terms with being in the European Union. And I regret to say he failed in both. The difficulty for Michael and myself was Tony wanted us all to campaign, but he would never do any damn campaigning himself. He introduced this newspaper-dominated, tomorrow's headlines, public relations advised approach to daily campaigning we have now. So it was never the right time for him as Prime Minister to do it. He occasionally make a European speech to cheer us up, and that would be somewhere abroad where he didn't think it would be picked up very much. And he thought Heseltine and me in British business should go out and campaign. Of course, the media were only interested in terms of there's no pro-conservative branch of the media that's pro-European. And so they only scorn anything that Hezra and I say. And the left-leaning ones only report Hezra and I as part of a Tory split to use it against the party. And so we never really got going, and it fizzled out. I mean, a lot went wrong with the recent campaign, but I don't think it was that. It was just, I mean, nobody had, on both sides, it was just lightweight nonsense. And we had this vast timetable, hugely lengthy campaign, with nobody having the faintest clue what it was they were really putting forward, apart from alarming scare stories about the other side. No serious speeches by anybody were reported by any branch of the national media. That was regarded as too boring and not something that their readers or viewers were interested in. So it was an exchange between everybody saying what would happen if you voted for the others. If you voted to leave, income tax would go up, the health service budget would be cut, every household would lose £4,300, all kinds of nonsense. And on the other side, if you voted to remain, 77 million Turks were going to come here and start molesting our women folk. And on the other hand, you have £350 million a week for the health service. And really no other, the official pro-campaign, the Downing Street campaign, which shoved out the not very effective all-party one, didn't want to be too pro-European, because the whole point was just to cheer up the Eurosceptics. So they wanted to sound a bit Eurosceptic all the way through. So the actual virtues, the benefits we got from membership were never expounded. And the idea of what the alternative was, what we might do if we left, was entirely repudiated by the Brexiteers, because they didn't agree with each other. And it was just all dismissed as scaremongering. You didn't have to talk about that. So after a completely useless campaign that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and we did get an extremely significant surge of various groups and interests. Both sides are perfectly intelligent, reasonable people with their own perfectly sensible reasons for voting Leave or Remain. I do think what tilted the balance Leave was the massive size of, I mean, I think the small C shires and suburbs conservative elderly vote, which thinks the world's changed and is not what it was predictable. But what was not predictable on this scale was what is really the Trump vote, which was the slightly older, white, working class man in clapped out towns in the north and the North Midlands, long ago abandoned the Labour Party, and was looking for a vehicle for protest and some simple solution that blamed the establishment, London, the politicians, for the fact they felt nobody was doing anything for them or their town or anything else. So you've got these massive majorities in places in the north which took the people over the line. So whatever else you do, and I think the campaign was a very interesting social phenomenon, but the actual national reported campaign, there was some very good campaigns going on in town halls and things. I had some very good opponents. I sort of, I had some quite, but none of that was remotely. They weren't very well attended, and the wider public wasn't very well aware of them. And there is an interesting political phenomenon in the result of this referendum, but it didn't have much to do with the campaigns, which are completely lousy and misleading on both sides.
Do you want to come over here?
Ken, great title, great LP, but I'd like to ask you about the SDP. Were you ever tempted by the SDP? And do you think that had it not been for the Falklands War, the SDP might have had a different trajectory?
No, I was never tempted. There were various, well, we had the sort of various inner tensions in the Conservative Party in the 70s. Various people tried to get Michael, I haven't put this in the book much, but there were one or two people, there were a couple of MEPs who tried to get Michael and I sort of interested in the idea of forming a breakaway party, which I haven't mentioned it because neither Michael or I ever remotely crossed our minds. I think our system, because I actually like our system when it works properly. The two-party system, first past the post, obliges the two parties to be huge, broad coalitions, centre-right, centre-left, a very wide range of views, which wouldn't be one party in most other European countries, certainly. And with the tradition of party discipline and collective responsibility and so on, so you actually you present the country with two groups that could be functioning governments that have produced an agreed platform to which they're committed, and the public are obliged to vote for one or the other if they want their vote to have any significance. They're punished if they decide to vote for some single issue party or some mad protest in general elections, quite rightly in my view. It's all about choosing a government. And conversely, as the Jenkynsites discovered, trying to break away and split one side of the centre-left or centre-right politics, is riddled with problems in our particular system because of the first-past-the-post system, the institutionalised position of the two parties. But I was never tempted. I mean, Blair had this project thing. The idea was he was going to attract One Nation Tories and Liberals into some great single tent, but it was all, I thought, total folly. And I felt more comfortable. I am centre-right. Free market economics with a social conscience, much easier line to pursue from the right of centre than from the left of centre, in cahoots with interest groups like the trades unions, who, as the book reveals, I spent half my life as a minister dealing with the worst aspects of the over-trades union-dominated world of my youth.
There are a lot of questions I can see, so let's just start here, and when we're coming around I can see you all.
Roger Kendrick, you blame the protest vote from those in the north, but actually if you look at the referendum results, 68% of constituencies voted to leave. And if that had been a parliamentary election, the Leave would have had a majority of 230 in the House of Commons. My question is, if you're, and I believe you are, you believe in parliamentary democracy as we know it in this country, but you also believe in Europe, which is basically to create a single country which is more or less governed. Well, okay. Can you reconcile your two views?
I do believe in parliamentary democracy. I've just given a slightly racy version of the effect of the voting system in this country. It's been very effective over the years. What I mainly believe in is that you present the public with your judgment of the kind of government you want. And that you set out, I think we now set out all kinds of rubbish in manifestos which are never distributed and nobody reads. But you do set out to an election a broad approach to government, what's the way in which you approach affairs, and then the individual members of the government and the individual MPs apply their own personal judgment. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, you're accountable back to your constituents. And you get sacked and you get replaced, and one side loses power when it makes a mess and it goes to the other. That's how the system works.
But not
to come up to date, and I'm totally against referendums on single questions, particularly big, broad brush questions that have about 100 questions wrapped up inside them, when most of the politicians have no clear idea, being candid, of everything's involved on the economy, trading relationships, security policy, criminal justice policy, that are going to flow from whichever way this vote goes, but particularly if it votes to throw over the last 40 years. I am very pro-European. I'm pro-European. I'm probably the only member of the Conservative Parliamentary Party who will vote against Article 50 if we get a vote. The government will win it easily. I have no idea why they're faffing about, resisting a vote on Article 50, because everybody else, most others, have sworn they'll follow the referendum, and they're terrified of the Daily Mail. But so they'll get a very nice big majority. But I was the biggest hypocrite unhung. If after almost 50 years in the House of Commons, and when I was campaigning for entry into the European Union before I even joined the House of Commons as a student politician, I was supporting Macmillan's application to join. For me, one of my last acts to cast a vote in favour of our leaving the European Union would be, the most dyed-in-the-wool leaver would regard me as the deep-dyed hypocrite, after all, at the end. If I certainly going to vote that, as it happens. I made it clear I thought the referendum was a ridiculous idea. As it happens, my constituents voted in favour of remaining, and I'm in favour of remaining. And we will lose that And then I still think there's a contribution to be made to, once we have a policy that resolves all these different versions of what we put in place by way of our relationships with Europe and the rest of the world, to actually try to form that in a way to, in my biased opinion, minimise the damage. But I've never believed all these conspiracy theories about it's all that there's a deep-dyed plot to form a United States of Europe. It's all a Franco-German conspiracy to govern the continent and all this stuff. That right-wing fringe groups throughout the world always rely on that kind of thing.
There's many questions here. There's two here. Would you go first? Then go ahead.
Okay. You were at the centre of things during the miners' strike.
Wasn't the centre of them, but I was
Well,
involved.
okay.
I had miners amongst my constituents.
Do you have any views about the government's current decision not to have a public inquiry about the behaviour of the police during one of the main...
Oh, I think Jeremy was entirely right not to have yet another public inquiry. I mean, the miners' strike was the worst piece of social conflict in my lifetime. I mean, it really was. It went to the root of how stable a society we were. I was perfectly quite strong in my own views at the time. It was an attempt to use intimidation and violence to bring down the government, I thought. I mean, that was my view. Scargill had done that with Heath, and he was about to do it again. And the picketing, the mass picketing, was extremely violent, and people turned up in large numbers. Again, I only had one pit left in my constituency by then, which was working, as all the Nottinghamshire ones were. And actually, miners from Kent, which was one of the militant regions, used to fight with policemen from Essex getting the overtime in the streets of Cotgrave, whilst all my constituents went over the fields to the pit, which was outside, and carried on working. But it was, people just went out knowing they were going to have a fight, and they were paid for it. And I think the police probably behaved quite badly in return. Some of the police were quite jokey about it. All the overtime they were earning. I remember one of them telling me he was going to get an Arthur Scargill car out of all this. And some of the, I don't know whether in South Yorkshire's got all kinds of things emerging about what it's been like on other issues. But Algrave apparently was a pitched battle, as Saltley had been a few years before. And I'm sure there were people on both sides who behaved absolutely appallingly. And when the police are taking bottles of bricks, a properly disciplined police force and properly led should not respond with cavalry charges, knocking people about. And we already had revealed the South Yorkshire habit of getting all the policemen to clear their statements for prosecutions afterwards, so you could alter all their narratives of events at Hillsborough and Algrave. But the purpose of demanding an inquiry is just a standard hard left cause. It's people trying to build the mythology, the religion around the miners' strike. The left-wing mythology is opposed to the right-wing mythology, which is also quite strong. But the left-wing mythology around it, and it's a complete waste of time and money, and we've got better things to do than just reopen political battles of 30 years ago.
I think we've got 1, 2, 3, and then we'll see how Ken feels about it.
I've got just hopefully not too long a question. Roger Luscombe.
So it's not tiredness, it's just a regular, but I'm plenty of time, actually.
The brickbats have been thrown at the Governor of the Bank of England from some of your backbench colleagues. The newspaper articles or front page of the Daily Mail about enemies of the people. There's a woman, Gina Miller, being threatened with gang rapes and murder and God knows what. And Nigel Farage on Andrew Marr talking about violence on the streets if things don't go his way. I mean, is there something fundamentally changing, or is it all the rough and tumble of politics and we should all,
No, I think the atmosphere is very nasty. I was joking earlier on, which is actually my approach to the politics of it. This is fascinating. And the role of what's going to happen in Parliament, the role of Parliament, and all the rest of it. The next 2 or 3 years is an unprecedented crisis. I should be voting, as I've said, in line with my opinions, but we have reached the bizarre situation where a Parliament in which the majority of ministers do not think that it's in the national interest to leave the European Union, and a majority of MPs do not think it's in the interest of the country to leave, where of the 5 political parties in England, 4 of them are in favour of the membership of the EU, only UKIP is against. It does create a parliamentary situation of considerable tension. It's made worse by this poisonous atmosphere of political debate outside. The dilemma of the media is acute because freedom of speech is one of our key principles. A free press, which is entitled to be disrespectful and annoying and all the rest of it, it is also absolutely key. We would all defend it. But this is neo-fascist, this denouncing of individual judges and calling them enemies of the people and so on. It is hard right stuff. People have said very silly things, and they're not. I mean, we've had enough of experts, which could splendidly have come from the 1930s as an outburst, and the attacks on the governor of the Bank of England are disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. And being biased, I do think it's the populist right have been more guilty of this than people on the other side, and I do think we should be more vigorous in everybody. A lot of the condemnations are routine, and I think we've got to be careful of a dangerous undercurrent. But I mean, you can go out there and do public meetings. I went to Hartlepool to do Question Time because I used to know Hartlepool when I was in the Cities Minister. We made our first abortive efforts to do something about the state of affairs in that isolated town with its old economy gone. But more importantly, I knew it to become a UKIP stronghold. And, people are perfectly entitled to their views, but the passion of some of those, aging white blue-collar workers, they were ready for anything. And somehow the political class have got to get this back under control. It's true every Western democracy. You can make the same analysis of Trump, Le Pen, Farage, on the left, Syriza, Podemos, five-star movement's the finest, way ahead in the polls in Italy. And this contempt for the political class and this usually angry protest and demand for some simplistic solution, scapegoats, usually foreigners, but someone to blame. Populist extreme politicians play it. That is their key. Farage had the brilliant realization that he was never going to get anywhere just banging on about the European Union, which didn't interest about half the population. But once he combined it with being anti-immigrant, there were we're not safe. We lost control of our borders, which is a lie. Then he realised we're in business. People like Johnson and Gove gave it respectability, this is dangerous times. And when it comes to, just denouncing personally, seeking to subvert and attack judges or the governor of the Bank of England or whoever, that's becoming one of the more dangerous symptoms. Shows no signs of calming down. And in no Western country have we yet produced any political leader who knows quite how to handle all this daily 24-hour frenzy. And actually, the only one who succeeded in the last 10, 20 years in preventing her democracy going back to this chaos, head and shoulders the best politician in Western Europe of my time, is of course Angela Merkel. Now, she's lost it now. She got carried away because of her background about refugees last year. So we're seeing, the last years, I think, of Angela Merkel now. I reassure myself that she's not some, ersatz Jack Kennedy. She's not had a makeover. She doesn't go in for power dressing. She doesn't seem to use sound bites and sloganize. And she doesn't employ the kind of ludicrous people that other Western leaders now employ. She's moody. She's very mumsy. She's tough as old boots. She's quite slow to move and make her mind up, and she's, you know, kept Germany as a pretty good two-party democracy, two and a bit, until recently, but she's lost it now. Alternative for Deutschland is roaring up. They'll be rivaling UKIP soon.
What about Theresa May?
Well, I like Theresa's style because she's not exactly Angela Merkel, but the fact she's a no-nonsense, not spun woman, she's not ideological in the slightest. She's very much, what is the problem, what are we going to do about it? She's pretty workaholic. She has a tremendous eye for detail. So those are all great qualities. And I'm quite prepared to give Theresa a bit of a chance. It's not her fault. And I already joked with her, you know, it's like everybody else, she wanted to be Prime Minister, but boy, is she taken over. She's been landed with a collection of problems which are almost insoluble. But no, she's, you never know, she might, but she faces the labours of Hercules. Firstly, to get the cabinet she's appointed to agree on a policy. And then moving on from, that's only the beginning, then you move on from there as to what you do next.
Let's just hear from Tessa Keswick, and then I'm coming.
Yeah, I suddenly glimpsed Tessa at the back there. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Listen, now I was going to ask you, there's a lot of talk at the moment about what sort of deal we could get, even though we are, you know, going out of Europe ostensibly. Do you think we can get a deal, or do you think it's going to be...
Well, there's bound to be a deal in the end. I mean, you can't just... I mean, the idea to just leave is ludicrous. Because all our other trade, I mean, we're all concentrating on the economy and trade at the moment, there's everything else as well. You know, we'd be the only developed country in the world that suddenly had no trade agreements with anybody. and wanted to start off on a whole lot of new ones with, you know, with protectionist countries like India, where we're trying today. And we'd suddenly have no arrangements for security cooperation and criminal justice and all kinds of other things, energy policy. So you can't just stop. And it's everybody's interest, sensible people in every European country, now to produce a deal once the British have decided what they want. The moment we're having and it's not really a phony war, it's a kind of fool's paradise. We're having a slightly over-agitated debate about what we're going to order the Europeans to agree to give to us to allow us to have our cake and eat it, as I think Boris memoir said on one occasion, and various packages are put together which are completely ludicrous. We give up bits of EU we like, so can we carry on enjoying those, but otherwise we want all kinds of terms which undermine the whole way in which it works and which couldn't conceivably be adopted or given to any other member, which is farcical. Needless to say, as we're starting with the economic prospects, which are quite important, my own personal wish will be to find something that kept us in the customs union and the single market, because it wasn't addressed in the referendum campaign by anybody, and you know, just minimise the political impact. I don't see how anybody economically literate can keep a straight face if they try to claim that you believe in free trade, but you're about to exit the biggest and most organised free market in the world with 500 million prosperous consumers, and it's not going to make you any poorer. Of course it'll make you poorer. That's probably, but what the hell do you think the Americans and people will try and improve their terms for? We're in the best possible terms inside. You can conceivably keep that. I think they're toying, trying to, and I was listening to David Davis, not in the chamber, but I was too late to get in, so I watched it on my television in my room, having missed the first few minutes. But they're obviously toying with staying in the customs union because they've accidentally left the single market. Because they got to say something at the conference. Somebody came out with all these things about abandoning free movement of labour, taking all our borders back, not sticking with the European rules, which are, of course, are the basis on which you get rid of the regulatory barrier in the single market. When we created the single market, we we went to common regulations and rules. So we're going to make all those British, and although we can't think of one we want to repeal at the moment, we're going to think of some, and then we're going to make them British, and then we're not going to get the European Court of Justice, which resolves any disputes about the rules, where we won some very important cases. That's how we've got the bloody passport for financial services now, by winning at the European Court of Justice when the Germans and French tried to stop it. So we pulled out of all those. Then apparently we were astonished that the pound went down by 15%. In my day, my colleagues had made stray remarks at the party conference and caused the currency to, my day as Chancellor, and caused the currency to crash by 15%, I'd have been quite annoyed. We probably no, it's the only way to solve all your economic problems is to jump your currency nowadays. So it's all good news. It's fine. But we're trying to claw back from that, I think. But they're toying with being in the customs union, which they're plainly, Theresa's dropped hints, and I think he was dropping hints again together. They retreat and say it's all very complicated, the customs union, and to stay in the customs union and at least prevent tariff barriers, which manufacturers and so on will benefit from. Though, of course, a full free market in modern economies, it's regulatory barriers that matter rather more to most. And they're obviously desperately anxious to keep the passport for financial services. But it's possible, but they are going to have to do a lot more work about what is feasible. If you believe in free trade, as we pronounce ourselves to be, you can't have a free trade area where the two parties that have agreed it both accept that neither of them is going to take any notice of the agreed rules if the sovereignty of their parliament occasionally demands that they change some of it, or there's going to be no way of enforcing the market rules, or that you'll buy their goods, but if people want to come to sell them to you, you'll have to get a visa. This is all rather comic. And so I hope by March we will have a serious negotiating position. On the continent, I get the impression they just give it up now. They just wait to see. And I hope it will take as long as we need, not because I want to delay it. I have no hope of not leaving, but people need to be made to read the brief and start producing proposals which are capable of being expressed in joined up writing. And you can sit down and start the negotiations, and we're a long way from that. I think we're all right on the security and criminal justice, because when I was Home Secretary, when I was Justice Secretary, Theresa was as ferocious on the lead for that as I was, and she helped get the arrest warrant and things through. So she's too strong on immigration, which has we have a lot of problems in immigration. You do have to control it, but people coming to work here are the least problematic bit of the whole problem, but we've got this wretched target, and we have to find some other thing. Way to hit the target is to have a really good recession. And I hope they find some less painful way of getting towards it.
Stuart, and then we're going to have one penultimate question, then I'm going to ask the last question.
You may gather I'm in rather a cavalier mood in my last line of events.
In your last chapter, you can see I'm a quick reader, you criticise David Cameron for taking a hell of a gamble in calling the referendum.
Yeah.
But do you not think that if he hadn't called it, he would not have got an overall majority, and we might indeed be governed by a coalition between Labour and the SNP?
Well, yeah, I was very annoyed that he called a referendum. I didn't resign because he'd already burnt his boats and it'd be announced that we're going to have a referendum. I'd read about it in the newspapers, and I wasn't the cabinet. And I thought it was quite the maddest idea I'd heard for a very long time. So I had a great row with him. Then we were tried to steer it onto sensible things of economic reform, because he didn't know what he wanted to reform, but there was a perfectly good case for going on with things we were already arguing for, extending the single market and trade agreements and deregulation and all that kind of thing. Because immigration wasn't an issue then, it was the beaches of Libya that made immigration an issue, but it wasn't around when he announced it. And I decided not to resign because I stay inside and try and keep up my pro-European awe, although I was getting towards the end of my time anyway. But I quietly abstained ingloriously on the bill on the referendum. Because collective responsibility had created a bit of excitement if I voted against it, so I stayed inside. No, it was, no one expected to have a referendum. None of the Eurosceptics thought they were actually going to get a referendum. It had been turned down repeatedly for years. And it was, I think if we hadn't had a referendum, you think it damaged UKIP, do you, or something? I don't know. The idea was, the purpose of having the referendum was apparently to calm down our Eurosceptic backbenchers who were creating the usual mayhem. And they'd all be quiet and happy to have a referendum later, after the election. Meanwhile, we could get on with running the government, said David. Well, of course, the Eurosceptics have never been so excited in all their lives as to be offered a referendum. And it was meant to be an anti-UKIP thing. It was his secondary thing, that it would stop Conservative voters going to UKIP. Well, because we got so many Eurosceptics in the party, we were obsessed with UKIP. And what we did do by announcing a referendum was really put UKIP centre stage, but it may have restrained the flood over to Farage, I don't know. But I think in the end, our rather surprising win in the election didn't have much to do with this. It didn't feature very much. It was failings on the Labour Party, and because of the feelings of financial insecurity, economic insecurity, the Labour Party, still not enough time had gone by for them to be forgiven for the collapse in 2007 and 2008. And they kind of didn't trust Ed Miliband and Ed Balls with the money. And that made people pull back from voting for them. They didn't like us. I campaigned in all the East Midlands marginals, where I say the election was won, in the Midlands and in Lancashire, in these marginals which we all thought were going to go to the Labour Party. And the sort of, you know, the voters of places like Ilkeston and places where I went campaigning, yeah, hi. And we were campaigning in just such a seat. Jessica, I thought the mood I summed up, because they were the same old places when I went around walkabouts around Hutton and things, and I thought, but the mood is the strong mood of, well, we're just going to have the bastards one more time. You can't let the Labour Party in yet. Not two heads and all that, and it's too dangerous, and that's how we won. Anyway, quite the longest answer I've given all evening. A lot of very long answers, but I don't think the referendum had anything to do with it. David found he'd won the election and was suddenly lumbered with having to hold one, which I think at the back of his mind when he first announced it, he wasn't anything like any more confident than I was that we were going to win the next election and have to deliver this ridiculous promise. It never crossed his mind he might lose it till the night of the count.
Let's take a penultimate
Thank you.
question.
Richard Tracy, former parliamentary colleague of Ken. Ken, you started life in Nottinghamshire, and you're still there, and I started life in Warwickshire, and I'm here. But I guess that most of the people, most if not all the people in this room, are part of this thing called the metropolitan elite, which has been criticised and has been laid out as the reason why the referendum went the way it did. How, in the next 5 years, or certainly 10 years, are we going to deal with this problem of the metropolitan elite? Because it could lead us to chaos, could it not?
Yeah. I mean, the metropolitan elite, or some similar, that is certainly... The populists with extreme views always going for that kind of thing. I mean, by definition, you're an anti-establishment figure. So it's all, you know, all these people, all these politicians, all these judges, all these bankers. You know, it's quite easy. And left-wing radicals and right-wing radicals have always managed to arouse feelings of that kind. It's up to the people who are in those elites, which is what they are, to somehow find a slightly better method of restoring confidence and withstanding that and not earning the disrespect on the scale which quite a lot of them do. I mean, politicians, I defend my trade union, and I think the belief that they're all the same as each other, they're only in it for what they can get out of it, they're all scoundrels, doesn't make a bloody difference who you vote for, a very widespread view, not just in the provinces, quite strong in London, isn't exaggerated when it comes to politicians. So the Spencer scandal was a scandal, but it was grotesquely exaggerated. Because they're so scrutinised, I think the standards of most politicians are much higher than practically any other professional group that I've ever encountered. But, you've got to make sure it'll be clearer that there are some ethical values and standards and so on. The city's got a long way to go, but it's tackling. Philip Green's emergence in the middle of this referendum was not helpful, as he epitomised what the people hated in provincial England. But it's a style of politics which we lack. That no one has emerged in any of the Western democracies, certainly not in America, certainly not here, who's somehow got the right style for the 21st century to overcome that and restore confidence and give a slightly more comforting feeling. And then there is the genuine problem. I think we all have to admit that we've all gone in for, free markets, free trade, all things I believe in. We've been immensely successful. We've raised the living standards of the country, the quality of life infinitely better than it was in my youth for most people. But we don't know now, let alone we didn't know before, what to do about the left behind. And they are left behind. And at least now we're paying more regard to it. Teresa in Downing Street was very good. My reaction to Teresa in Downing Street was, that's terrific. I wonder who's working on the policies to do about any of the things that she was describing, because we haven't had a policy that's worked to do about any of those things for the last 20 or 30 years. And from left or right, left of centre, left of right, right of centre, I trust, someone's got to emerge who can mobilise that and start tackling these divides.
Well, Ken, I'm going to, it's the tradition of the Centre for Policy Studies that the chairman gets to ask the last question.
Right.
So now I'm going to do that, if I may. And so what I'd like you to tell us all is that you've just said there's been a vacuum in terms of the kind of leader who could deal with all these issues that you've discussed. We all know that you were described for years as the natural leader of the Conservative Party. And we can see, all your fans here tonight can see how completely articulate you are on the subject of Europe and politics and everything else. So here's my question. This is a school, as this is the home of grown-up intellectual rigour, we'll end with a schoolboy question, which is, let's say you had become leader of the Conservative Party and you had become Prime Minister. What would be the difference in Britain today?
That's a little light question. Yeah. Well, firstly, I've not. No doubt avoided a great deal of trouble, so by not. But I can't be accused of not trying. But and every now and then you say very kind and flattering and slightly embarrassing things. But there is a sort of club that's been formed of the best Prime Minister we never had, which is usually Roy Jenkins and Geoffrey Howe and Dennis Healey and me. And I always think the one thing that, fortunately, for the four of, let's take those four, which I choose at random, Michael Heseltine, fifth one, is at least nobody ever tested it. We'd probably have been catastrophic. It lasted about 6 months and left behind disaster. I have no idea whether how I'd have managed and whether I'd have been successful or not. The various times I tried to stand, I would have. I think, with hindsight, I think it's my European views that stopped me ever winning. And actually, with hindsight, there's quite a case for that. I did understand why a lot of my friends voted for David Cameron the last time I stood, because he was standing on the same sort of platform as me, but hadn't got any of the political baggage, the sort of, all the quarrels and, you know, feuding and civil war that I'd been a leading and controversial light in for the previous few years. Everybody wanted to leap a generation and get rid of these people who'd all gone mad over Maastricht and start all over again. But I fear if I'd won in 97 or I'd won in 2001, the Conservative Euro battle would have carried on absolutely remorselessly. Electing me would help to excite it in a way. Similarly with Hesse, that was Hesse's problem. And Hesse and I would have been actually more combative, would not have made the attempts to be conciliatory that John Major always unsuccessfully did. And perfectly conceivable that if we'd been more combative, we might have won. More likely, we'd have caused complete and utter mayhem. At least the party had a bit of a change for a time, and it had a bit of a pause from Euro wars and decided to have Portuguistas versus Hagites for a year or two, which I can remain neutral in, but they tore that opposition party apart on all that. But I don't know. I mean, I would have sought to pursue, well, the kind of position we reached at the end of John's period. I thought the Thatcherite revolution was coming right. I thought the way we got the economy on its feet, the way we were reforming public services, our internationalist policies, I would have tried to pursue those with more fervour, with particular enthusiasms of my own, which I tried to do. I'd also run a very collective government. I did approve of the idea that it was a team in which some of the cabinet ministers were quite substantial figures, and all policies went through cabinet committees and cabinet. You have all sorts of challenges when you're forming a policy, but that of your colleagues is the best, actually. They often improve your bright ideas by having a serious go at them. And I would never have introduced the present style of campaigning and all the rest of it, which I always find myself expressing rage about, because I think it's one of the things that's led us to the fiasco in recent electoral combat in this country.
On that wonderful note, we all are very grateful to Ken for a marvellous talk, and you've given wonderful answers. And I'd like you all please to thank Ken for coming.